So this presentation is not going to be directly on mental health, but we'll get there. And we'll get there because we'll talk about some work that we're doing at the Department of City Planning to empower neighborhoods with information about what the built environment is like, other indicators about the health of people, and how those indicators can help lead to a community process in which there's input from the community that changes the way that the city invests infrastructure money. So my name is Jonathan. I'm a technologist in government. I'm a passionate urbanist and currently product manager and developer at this team called NYC Planning Labs. And so NYC Planning Labs is a digital service team embedded in the Department of City Planning, and we are interdisciplinary. We have product managers, designers, and developers. And our mandate is to build software for urban planners and the public to help them better understand the city. We are cut from the cloth of what's called the civic tech movement. Some of you might have heard of organizations like the Government Digital Service in the United Kingdom or 18F and US Digital Service in the United States. But suffice it to say, it's a movement of people, technologists, who are interested in how to improve the way government uses technology and how it builds technology. A lot of this was sort of in the United States brought to bear after the healthcare.gov troubles. But essentially it's saying government has a lot of really important problems that technology can help with, and I really like the framing in a previous presentation. It's definitely not the answer or the only answer, but there are a lot of ways in which technology gets in the way, or bad technology gets in the way, for government to do its work correctly. And then because we're based, our team in Department of City Planning, our output is what some people are now calling plan tech, which is essentially technology to help better planning outcomes. And it's often leveraged on some big data sets. And in the Department of City Planning, we're really lucky to have been on the forefront of building really foundational data sets for the city for several decades, and I'll talk about what we've built on top of that. And so, broadly, what we've built in Planning Labs, we've got a whole bunch of different tools. I don't have time to talk about them. We're going to focus on one. But essentially, we do a lot of tools around data resources, so just getting the data you might be interested in. We build tools for the business function of the agency, so the land use review process, the environmental review process. And then we build tools that are more like data storytelling tools that are meant more as to explain, kind of like an interactive report versus a tool that you might use day to day in your work to access data. But the tool I want to focus on today is one called Community District Profiles. And it was built with our colleagues in the agency, the division called Planning Coordination, and Jorge, you'll meet Jorge in just a sec. And that tool is for the New York City community boards to better understand their neighborhoods. And we'll talk about community boards as well, but for those who don't know, there's 59 groups, neighborhood areas in New York City, and they have input in the way that the city shapes itself. And so the whole point of this tool is to make data about that neighborhood more accessible. And it'll be a lot more fun if I show you what that looks like. Let's try to full screen this. So this is the app. It's called the Community Profiles. You can get to it at communityprofiles.planning.nyc.gov. And what it allows you to do is find your address or your neighborhood. So let's look at this particular building that we're in right at the moment. And zoom in, and it gives you now a cut of information about that neighborhood. And this is what's really powerful about this, is taking really massive data sets that we have on open data. We have all this data available, but trying to make it accessible for anybody in the community to understand their neighborhood. So here you can start to see some basic demographic information, foreign-born density of this community district. But then you start to see some indicators. And this is also where we can start to play into the idea of health or community health, or what are the indicators that might play into that health. So you have things in terms of the commute to work, or the rent burden, access to parks or cleanliness, crime, educational attainment. And what's also powerful about the tool is that it gives you your neighborhood in relation to all 59 community boards in New York City. So you get a sense about questions of equity or questions of investment. Along that, we start to take the data, the really rich data we have in New York City planning about the built environment, and start to give you cuts of that. So you start to see perhaps what the primary land use is in your neighborhood, or what the primary zoning is in your neighborhood. We also take the number of facilities. We have this really powerful data set that essentially is all the facilities that are leased and operated by New York City. So that's everything from a parking garage to a health clinic to a park. and give you a sense of that, a sense of some primary community facilities like schools and libraries. We get into questions of sustainability around the floodplain, even really complex information around the number of buildings with basements that might be at risk. And then finally, you start to see information around the sort of process of this community input. So the community board, which Jorge will talk about a bit, gives you access to this board in which, as a citizen, you can start to be engaged and shape what that neighborhood might suggest to the city as its priorities. You also can see the activity, the land use activity going on in your neighborhood, and finally, a whole bunch of other resources about that place. And so Jorge is going to join me now and frame now that I might have this information as a citizen, what's the next step?
Thank you, Jonathan. So this conference has been really inspiring, and I'm going to kind of take it down a notch and talk about a bureaucratic process. And as Jonathan Pichot was alluding to, talk a little bit about how by having information, data accessible and useful, how that can tie in to the way communities, one, perceive their needs, but also advocate through two formal processes that influence the city's, New York City's budget and planning decisions. And so when we think about community perspectives from our point of view, we're talking about the Statement of Community District Needs and the Community Board budget requests. And these are just one of many several processes that influence, again, New York City's large budget and several planning and land use built environment related decisions. Every year, all of New York City's 59 community boards submit these two formally to my team. We then facilitate that information, we process it, and we share it with the Office of Management and Budget, and share it across the city with all the relevant city agencies. And so when you kind of think about that for a second, for those of you that aren't too familiar with community boards, they're appointed, okay, so they're not elected. They are also, depending on the districts they represent, their resourcing can vary greatly. So you can imagine the differences in resources for community districts in the Bronx versus those in downtown Brooklyn, like the district we're in right now. Their understanding of issues also varies greatly, and something that Planning Labs and our agency has continued to attempt to improve is the access to information, right? But not just the access to information, but how that information is shared. And so what I'd like to do now is walk through an example of a community board submission of these needs and budget requests and how they've leveraged the community district profiles and how they've leveraged other data and other information to formulate their needs and submit their direct budget requests to New York City. And so we're going to focus on Bronx Community District 4, which is made up of the High Bridge and Concourse neighborhoods. So for those of you that are from the Bronx, you know, the story might sound familiar, right? This is a historically disinvested community district. They have high poverty rates. And we can go through all the negatives and all of the bad health outcomes that have been a result of this investment. But there are also positives. They're a growing community district. They're also a young community district, so just over 20% of their population is under 18, right? So we can kind of start thinking about, yeah, we can focus on the negatives, but there are also a lot of positives that a tool like this can help highlight. And as Jonathan mentioned, you know, there are obvious indicators that affect several different aspects of a community, of mental health issues, that are directly related to the built environment, such as the rent burden. Here, you can see that over 50% of the residents in this district pay over 35% of their income in rent, right? So there's over half of the district residents are rent burdened. We can see other key indicators here related to this district and how it matches up to the other 58 community districts. If you remember when Jonathan was walking through the district we're in right now, the stories that you can start deriving from this information are vastly different. And I think this is one of the powerful and one of the most meaningful outcomes of having data accessible and having tools like this, where a community district that's advocating for some of their needs and asking the city to invest within this district can use this information, one, to better understand its current situation, but also see where there are gaps or disparities when compared to other areas in the city. And so I wanted to quickly highlight what the top 3 pressing issues that were identified by this community district are. And so again, these are derived from the community board, right? So for those of you that might be familiar with the area, these might align with some of the conditions or some of the input you hear from community members, but maybe it doesn't. And so in this case, affordable housing was one of the top 3 issues, followed by crime and youth and children's services. So these are in no way prioritized or ordered. These are just the top 3 most pressing issues as perceived by this community board, right? And something that we encourage and that we continue to emphasize within these submissions is that community boards use information, use data that's accessible to them to help substantiate these needs. So I've highlighted a few key examples related to these 3 issues, where the community board is bringing in data, highlighting the growth of the population within their district, highlighting the above average crime statistics within the district, and the need for not only increased school capacity, right, but services related to youth. And so when we're thinking about how community perceives their issues, data is just one input, right, that can help contextualize that, can help communities advocate for certain services, certain investments. The other more formal process that the city facilitates are the budget requests. And so every community board also has a mandate to submit on behalf of the community district specific budget requests, again, that get shared with all city agencies. And here I'm highlighting just a few examples that relate to some of the top issues that were identified by the community district. And so related to affordable housing, the community board has asked for an increase in median income housing, right? Related to crime, not only has the community board asked for assigning additional uniformed officers, but they're also asking for additional community affairs officers, right? So leveraging both the programs that are offered by the NYPD. And then as it relates to youth and children's services, again, they're submitting requests that advocate for an increase in both the school capacity, but also the services that are provided to the youth as it relates to after-school programming. And so while these submissions, right, these needs and budget requests are just one of many inputs that go into the decision-making process of the city in general, but also in terms of the decision-making process that individual agencies go through. Something that we believe is core to substantiating these inputs and putting these together is information. And so something that Planning Labs continues to do is making data more accessible. And that's something that I hope through this presentation you begin thinking about what are other data sets that might not be as accessible, as user-friendly, that could benefit a community, an advocacy group, or just yourself in general to understand some of the issues and conditions that are in your neighborhoods. And I do want to just end with just highlighting that for this district, some of these budget requests have recently been addressed, and so some of the needs that the community board has identified have been addressed through a variety of different methods. Most recently with the recent Jerome Avenue rezoning, which some of you might be familiar with, there was a renewed commitment by the city to bring in increased affordable housing into the district, as well as several public realm improvements related to the built environment under the elevated train tracks, in the district, as well as renovations to Grant Park. And so, again, this is just one input into the variety of factors that lead to a specific city agency or a broader city priorities, but it's also a really important one to keep in mind, and it's one to continue to familiarize yourself with. And in terms of, again, coming back to the data, the more information, the more data that we can continue to share with these communities, the more informed and the better they can continue to advocate for services, investments, and other programs within their districts.